Such a pleasure to be with you here this morning. I'm originally from Elmira, New York. Went to Union Springs Academy for a couple years, graduated from there. Went off to Atlantic Union College. Any Atlantic Union College graduates? Okay, one, two, only two. And I've worked as a pastor for over 30 years, mostly for the church. Massachusetts, Connecticut, and more recently in Tennessee. I've spent a couple years training in chaplaincy ministry at a VA hospital in Tennessee. 1 year was just regular medical chaplaincy training, and more recently I spent a year training in mental health chaplaincy with their psych departments and psych floors. I come to you as a broken sinner holding on to a merciful and loving God. Trusting, learning the journey and the path of trusting God and being remade into His image and His likeness. I felt a call from God years ago. You know, sometimes you don't always know what's God and what's you. And sometimes the two are kind of fused together, and you got to learn to, figure out how to separate them. And that has certainly been my journey. And as a pastor, early on, I developed a concern for people and families that you would see would implode or explode, get into a tailspin, and wondered why. And just decided to make it a mission to look and see what can we do for our families, and families come in different shapes, and for individuals. Because while we experience a call from God, we still have our humanity. And I'm reminded of Abraham. You remember Abraham received a call from God to come out of Ur and to go to this promised land. God was going to make him into a great nation. And you would think okay, I'm not sure why it went off, but it's back on. So you would think if God calls you and makes promises, you would think everything's going to turn out all right. As young pastors and new Christians, and I just loved the baptism today, we think that we're going to take over the world. We're going to do these amazing things for God. And those things can happen at times, but more often than not, our humanity kind of sabotages and gets in the way, and there's Satan and there's us, and then I'm broken and you're broken, and I have this theory, and don't quote me on this. If Satan were to disappear, be eradicated, we would still be broken and dysfunctional and have issues and problems. Because we are broken, we were born as sinners and broken and so forth. And so what's Satan, what's me, or other people can be difficult to sort out. But when Abraham received that call, I can imagine him thinking everything was going to be just amazing and perfect and wonderful. And God brings him to this promised area, this beautiful, lush area, and says, this is going to be yours. And you're going to be a great nation. Wow, me, God, you're going to do all that for me? How wonderful. Well, one of the next things that happens is a famine hits the land. And there's no food. This land that God promises to Abraham now is not all that desirable, really, at least for that period of time, that moment. And so Abraham has to go down into Egypt. And Abraham has a suspicion. He knows his wife is beautiful. And he knows a little bit about the Egyptians. And so he makes some assumptions. And he says to his wife, "You are beautiful. Let's tell them you're my sister so they won't kill me." And so they went through that plan, and God got him out of it. But why would God put Abraham in a situation like that? Why would he allow something like that to happen? It didn't happen once, it happened in 2 different countries. You'd think he'd learn the first time. This is a man called by God to become the foundational nation that's going to spread his gospel to the world. And he betrays his wife and says, "She's my sister." There was suffering that happened from that. Sarah must have suffered from that pain. Abraham suffered from the experience. The servants and everyone, I'm sure they loved Sarah, and they must have suffered, all because Abraham misinterpreted something and gave in to his humanity. Now, I'm not here to beat up on Abraham, because Abraham was probably a whole lot better person than I am. But I want to illustrate the challenges that we humans can experience when we're on the journey to God, with God, and what I call the incredible journey. So this morning I want to share a little bit of my journey with you. When I learned about attachment injuries, I listened to it on the radio and like, wow, they're really onto something. And for those who are interested, most of my materials coming from the book How We Love by Mylan and Kay Yurkovich. They're Christian counselors who specialize in attachment injuries. And I have a sign-up sheet for people who might be interested in going a little deeper through an online group and so forth. I'll talk about that in the afternoon. But when I learned about this material, I was like, wow, they're onto something. I got the book and was reading the book, and I was like, oh yeah, that's my wife. She's an avoider. And oh yeah, this person, they're a vacillator. And oh yeah, they're controllers, definitely. These attachment injuries that are talked about in the book. And I didn't know everybody and everyone, and I don't even know what you are after a brief conversation, but I was pretty certain and confident of some people that I knew and close, and they're that, and so forth. And then one day, as I was listening to one of their videos, I realized that I too had an attachment injury. And I was stunned. God sent the prophet to David after he had the affair, and the prophet tells him a story and so forth, and David becomes furious, and the prophet says to him, "You're the what? You're the man. You're the one I'm talking about," in symbolic language. And so I had one of those "you're the man" moments with God, and it came through reading the writings and observations of other people. So on your screen here, we've talked about the imprint of a secure love style. In an optimal environment, we have feelings. We're a bundle of needs as infants. God created it that way. And in an optimal environment, the child's needs are recognized, welcomed, and seen. And the child develops a full range of emotional spectrum. They don't get stuck in anger. They don't get stuck in sadness. They can't only be happy or whatever. They're able to move around and have different feelings and a full spectrum of feelings. They don't have to cut off these feelings and not feel them anymore. And they learn to feel and deal with their emotions. They learn how to manage their emotions in a healthy way. And in this optimal environment, the parental response is to contain the child's needs, My allergies are catching up with me. Contain the child's needs and give appropriately, and offer comfort when the child is distressed. The child responds to this nurturing and caring and support and boundary setting, and they feel loved, seen, important, safe, and whole. And this brings relief to them, trust and respect. And so they're able to go through this life with a sense of well-being. They know that there are problems in the world and struggles and things that go wrong, but they have been instilled with a sense of confidence, of well-being, a sense of discernment of people and how to navigate. They don't see people as all good or all bad, but a mixture. They're able to give and take. They're able to say no. They're able to ask for help. They're willing to give help. And so they develop what's called a secure connection. And that happens after hundreds and thousands of experiences of being comforted, stress relieved, and developing a sense of well-being. I don't know what your home was like, but that was not my home. My home was not an abusive home, but I was kind of left to fend for myself growing up. I had food, I had clothing, I had shelter. At times I had family that lived nearby, but my mother was a single mother. My father was not involved in any way, not physically, not financially, and so forth. It was her and I. She worked a lot of hours, and she was preoccupied with other things. Now, I was well-fed, clothed, church school, so forth. She was a good person, but she was not an in-tuned person. She didn't know what was going on in my inner world day to day, what was happening at school, the highs, the goods, the bads. She was pretty much clueless of all that, and I didn't necessarily know how to share that or even engage. In fact, it was interesting. She used to say this to me, and I didn't understand it until I became acquainted with this material. She would say, not to me, but to my wife, she says, when Brian was a child, he didn't want to have anything to do with me. And I'm like, what in the world does that mean? Now our relationship had improved over the years. She's now deceased, and came to really grow closer to her and so forth. But it became clear to me why I became the person that I became. And so you grow up, you're born, you have all these feelings and needs. Well, in my home, or in the vacillator home, which is an attachment injury, the parent sometimes sees the child and sometimes does not. Now, we're not talking about sees with the eyes, but attunement to the child and what their needs are and hurts and joys. What do they enjoy? What are they good at? So there's some attunement there, but it's not consistent. And the focus is on the parent's needs and whims for emotional availability. That may sound a little harsh, and in some cases it may be accurate. We're not looking to be harsh here, but the parent connects when they want to connect, when they feel motivated to connect, when they feel the need to connect. So there creates some unpredictability there. And in this environment, the child's expression becomes limited, or it can become extreme or sporadic. And they learn to try to read the mood of the parent and other people. Is this person going to be available? Is this person interested? So on and so forth. And so the parental response is inconsistent and unpredictable. The child is left to wait for connection, which is governed more by the parent's mood than the child's need. I don't know if you're able to read all that up there. But there's a reaction that develops in the child. They become confused and hypervigilant to try to predict and control a relationship. And they become angry and anxious at having to wait for connection. As a child, I was not aware of any of this stuff. I mean, I kind of liked growing up on the streets of Elmira and doing whatever I pleased, whenever I pleased, except I had to be home by a certain time at night. In fact, I missed a lot of days of school. I just wake up, and at times I just didn't feel like going to school, and so I would just skip school, and I might be home watching TV. Do you all get WPIX here from New York? No? Okay. That was one of the channels we'd get in Elmira from New York City and watch cartoons and whatever. So as a child, I was pretty satisfied with the life I had as far as I remember. But when I got into marriage, things started showing up. Which leads to the next part under vacillator. They look for an intense, consistent connection in relationship. That's not with everybody everywhere. That's just a few select people, spouse, children, good friends, so forth. So the childhood setting for the vacillator is inconsistent connection with caregivers. And in life, they unconsciously or consciously develop the need, the goal to feel special and exclusive. They want to be a best friend or whatever. To be seen and understood is a strong drive, a desire. And to avoid criticism because it means I'm flawed or unlovable. Expectations they develop in life, conscious or unconscious, close relationships with a few people, and expects intense feeling of love and affection in marriage, and generally craves attention. Can become anxious if close, anxious if apart, and can appear like a pleaser, which we covered this morning, but can get very, very angry. Underneath, there's confusion, disappointment, sadness, and grief underdeveloped. Triggers. We've said triggers are something that happen in the present, but they tap into your past. And so the past comes flooding into the present. How many of you think you might have some triggers? You have reactions and you don't even know why you reacted so strongly, or the person you're with, like, what was that? You feel justified in the reaction, but often the reaction has tapped into some previous pain or previous experience and has become present, but you're not aware of it. You think the current situation is as bad as you responded. Closeness may, when others depart, it can trigger feelings of abandonment. Having to wait for attention and connection can trigger a vacillator. Vacillators at times may sabotage relationships for fear of getting hurt and being made to wait. And they believe a relationship lie, that a good relationship is one that you can feel. Vacillators tend to feel deeply. And this is not a good or bad thing. This is just what is. And I need someone to make me happy. Vacillators are very needing a relationship. So we tend to have tendencies towards all good or all bad. We see people as amazing and incredible, but then sometime later they may be the worst person. And this can happen in relationship. I can just be in awe and love with my wife, and then I can just be really annoyed because she's not there for me. She's not available. She's task-oriented and project-oriented. And so we have a tendency to rush into relationships and idealize them when we're dating. We tend to be blind to people's flaws, weaknesses, shortcomings. But then when we realize the flaws and shortcomings this person has, we devalue them. We feel deceived by them, that they're not what we thought they were, or not as they portrayed themselves. That's our interpretation. So we can become very angry, disillusioned, and disappointed with people at times, especially those that we want to be close with. And so it taps into our pain, which is more likely to display as anger than hurt, even though we feel the hurt. And so people who are in close relationship can feel this message of, come here, I need you, go away, I'm mad. So let me describe a dynamic that would go on between my wife and I. Under stress, I would want to seek out connection, conversation, doing things together. My wife grew up in an environment where she learned not to expect those things and became self-sufficient, self-reliant, task and project-oriented. That's where she found her meaning and satisfaction academically and so forth. So as I would pursue her in stress, she would be preoccupied with the work and tasks that she took on and would want me to wait. So I would wait, and I would wait, and I would wait. And within inside of me is this internal distress that's building up into a volcano. And then it erupts because I'm an extrovert. Now, introverts will quietly sulk. It'll be there, but they're not as likely to erupt. So I would erupt and tell my wife off or express my anger, which would cause an avoider to withdraw. Oh, I better let him calm down. So I would remove myself, hoping that she would pursue me. She wouldn't pursue me. She would withdraw, waiting for me to calm, to become calmer. And guess what that did to me? It made me madder. And so we had this predictable cycle based on attachment injuries. And somehow we'd find our way through it and have peace and so forth until the next time. And we've had many great times in our life. It's really tends to be more about stress and need and so forth. And so the avoider I'm going to talk about this afternoon, they need to lean into relationships more, be more intentional about connecting and providing time and broaden their range of feelings and ability. The vacillator needs to find ways to better manage that internal distress, discomfort, that internal craving. And so there's a tendency to devalue someone when you're disappointed. And I think this can happen even in other aspects of life. Like as a pastor, I could devalue a church when it's not what I want it to be or feel it should be, or I could idealize it and so forth. And the vacillator wants intense good feelings and mistakes emotional intensity for intimacy. So you may be a vacillator if you're a sensitive person, if you desire deep, passionate connection with a spouse or friends but rarely seem to get it. If you've had a history of idealizing others early on and then later becoming deeply disappointed. You feel somewhat easily disappointed, rejected, or unwanted. Can become angry when the expectations are not met. Feel betrayed, abandoned when others are not emotionally available. It's tapping into those early years of life experience and you don't even know it. And one sign of a vacillator can be you're prone to cut people off. And I described this once to a distant relative, these qualities, and she's a high vacillator. I would probably consider myself more moderate. There's lower level, moderate, high. She said, and we had a good relationship. She said, "You're making that stuff up." I said, "No, I'm reading this book," and it described her to a T. And it was a mystery to her. It was a mystery to others. It had been a mystery to me. And maybe there's some here that it's been a mystery for you, whether you're in relationship with a vacillator or you identify as a vacillator. And so you experience internal conflict with a high level of emotional stress in relationships. And again, that, if you're a higher level vacillator, stronger vacillator, you're going to feel that more. It might be more subtle and difficult to detect. If your conflicted responses confuse others and yourself at times, you might be a vacillator. If others feel like they walk on eggshells around you, you might be a high vacillator. If you have difficulty accepting the weaknesses of others, you might be a vacillator. If you have difficulty being willing to re-engage when anger blocks out other emotions, you might be a vacillator. Vacillators tend to reflect more on how others have hurt them than their own shortcomings. Or it could be a combination of both, and will feel bad about themselves and want a close person to be there for them to relieve their feelings. And can resent a person for not being emotionally available. I used to remember thinking, if my wife would just be available, I would be okay. And so she needed to grow in her areas, but I needed to become less dependent. I don't know if any of you watched Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck, but this is an old clip from a cartoon. There's Daffy Duck being smothered by some kind of beast, I don't remember. And in the cartoon, it says, I will name him George, and I will hug him and pet him and squeeze him. And here's Daffy Duck feeling smothered. People, especially avoiders, who are in relationship with a vacillator could feel smothered. Or they may feel like this. Someone's got the vacillator has their hands reached out. They're good, kind, caring, loving, fun people, whatever. But the person knows that sooner or later there's going to be a disruption and may be inclined to keep some distance. And that only complicates the issues. As parents, vacillators love the attention and affection they get from their children when they're young. They can be difficult when the children mature and become more independent and not necessarily need the parent as much. They can be fun-loving, moody, but also explosive and unpredictable. Can feel abandoned if the other parent is consumed with the child's needs. I remember my wife being consumed with our firstborn son and just feeling like I'm left out. Well, what do you think a person who is inclined in needing connection and attention is feeling left out for long periods of time? What do you think might become a temptation for them? I'm going to find love somewhere, which could make you prone toward idealizing another relationship, developing an emotional affair, and could even lead to an actual affair for the seeking of meeting your unmet emotional needs from growing up. Thankfully, God kept me from that, but I can't say that there weren't times in my life where I thought about the grass being greener somewhere else. Do you know what I'm talking about? Now, all of us, any of us can experience it, but vacillators are going to be more likely to experience it. We have a hard time showing interest in our child's interests. We want our child to be interested in what we're interested in. We want to feel that connection with them about something that's special to us. And so we have to work harder to show interest in things that our child or others are interested in that we're not interested. We can become emotionally dependent upon our children. And so this, for me, led to some spiritual challenges, and I didn't understand it until after the fact. When I was in graduate school, I was studying. I went to Boston University for a graduate degree, and then I went to Andrews later on. And I was struggling. I was not prepared academically. I was, a late bloomer in life. When I was at high school at Union Springs, you had those who were going to the farm and factory and those who were going to college. Factories were disappearing in New York at that time. And I looked at the groups and I said, I don't know how to milk cows, so I'm following these guys. And I went to college clueless and had only started learning how to study later in life because I didn't have that discipline growing up. But when I got to graduate school, I met challenges that I was not prepared to deal with. And I felt abandoned by God, and I became atheist for a period of time. I saw all the suffering in the world and all this going on, and how could a God allow this, and how is God allowing me to have this pain? And through, some of the stuff that I studied and so forth, I just came to the conclusion that we created God, that we made up God, and God doesn't exist. Well, later on, I realized that, yeah, there is that intellectual part, but it was even more so an emotional part. God wasn't there for me, I felt, and so it must be that he doesn't exist. And so I cut off God. As I said, vacillators can cut off people. I cut off God. Thankfully, he brought me back around through a series of things that we don't have time to talk about today, but vacillators can be challenged spiritually when God seems absent. We want God to feel close. We want this warm, passionate, consistent relationship. But strangely enough, that's not quite how God works. It's not always warm and fuzzy. There's struggle in the journey. He leaves us in silence at times to test us and strengthen us. And we were talking about Abraham. I believe God led him out. He had a plan. He saw qualities in Abraham, but he took him on a journey to refine him, to develop his trust, to develop his strength. He did the same with the disciples. He did it with David. He did it with others. So God is not always this warm, fuzzy person who's there, and you could feel him when you need him. Sometimes we have to walk by faith and not by feelings. Amen? And that was especially true for me. Conflict can become challenging. Social connections at church at times can become challenging depending on how high a level of vacillator you are. So what can you do? You can learn about your injury. How's it affecting your life? My seminar overall is called Healing Relational Blind Spots. We have these things that we don't see, that we're not aware of, that are holding us back from our God-given purpose and image. And so we need to go on a journey of understanding. How is my upbringing impacting my life, shaping my life, preventing me from experiencing all that God has for me? And then you got to own it. When I realized that I had the vacillator attachment injury, I was stunned for a couple of weeks. And my responses and reactions, now I knew better. But I didn't have a way of responding better. I wanted to erupt. I wanted to pout. I wanted to retaliate. But I knew, I became aware of this is my injury. This is what's living out. I've got to do better. And so there's a struggle there of figuring out new ways of coping. Of course, we want to take stuff to God in prayer and journaling. But we need to also practice different ways of responding. So I had to learn to sit with the pain rather than retaliate and react. I had to learn to not allow things in me to escalate and to kind of slow them down and practice new behaviors, because as much as I did not like behavioral psychology, one of the prominent ways that we change is by doing things differently and creating new neural pathways in our minds and responses. So we got to become more mindful of our thoughts and feelings. One of the things that has helped me was learning to label thoughts and feelings. It can create some distance between those thoughts and feelings. Our brain are generating thoughts and feelings all the time based on our experiences in the past, what we're anticipating in the future. And so I've been able to develop through mindfulness to say, oh, there's fear showing up. Oh, there's trauma talking. Oh, there's sadness. Oh, I see judgmentalism arising in me right now. And by doing that, you create a little distance from those feelings, and then you can intentionally choose how you want to proceed rather than reacting emotionally. And there's this field called self-compassion, which has become very important. In life, we tend to beat ourselves up for our flaws and shortnesses and weaknesses. And the study of self-compassion has shown that we do better in life if we can be kind to ourselves, sympathetic to ourselves, so that then we can move forward in the direction that we know we should move, rather than getting stuck in beating ourselves up and condemning ourselves. And so I've had to learn to develop some self-compassion. And for my wife. Practice Comfort Circle. We're going to go over that in the afternoon. Support groups and so forth. Become observers of your thoughts. Practice curiosity about your thoughts and feelings. Oh, what is that? Allowing them to come and go. Choose the ones that are helpful. Identify your values and move towards those values rather than feeling. There's so much more that we could say, but I can't see a clock. Well, I can see a clock, but I don't want to wear out my welcome. We have to become aware of the assumptions and guesses that we're making about other people's actions. Vacillators develop the instinct of reading people. And we're probably better average of discerning where someone's at. But we're not as accurate as we think we are. And we assign motive to people that is not always accurate and can be harmful. And so we have to suspend our judgment about people's actions. They did this because, and blah, 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 whatever. And like, well, all we know is they did this. We don't often know their motive, because maybe at one time they did it, and they did it for a reason, but maybe this time they did something, but it was for a different reason. And so we are not mind readers, even though we're pretty good at reading minds. Does that make sense? Anyone here identifying with any of this? Maybe you've been in a relationship with someone, or you yourself have some of these tendencies. I see some heads nodding. We need to seek God's help and pray earnestly over what we're learning, and have that foundational relationship with Him. And just want to wrap up with this. Jacob, he was called by God. God had a purpose and mission to him. He had to go through a whole lot of stuff, and how he ended up with 2 wives and 2 concubines or whatever mistresses beyond that is beyond me. It doesn't make any sense, but that was his culture. That was his environment. Those were the circumstances that he was shaped by and influenced by. And one day God told him to get up and leave his uncle's place, take all of his stuff, take all of his children and his wives and so forth. And so we're told that night Jacob got up and took his 2 wives and female servants and 11 sons and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. After he'd sent them across the stream, he sent over all of his possessions, and he was left alone, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip. I'm sure Jacob at first thought it was his brother or some random person attacking him. Touched his hip, so his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, "Let me go, for it's daybreak." But Jacob replied, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." Jacob came to realize that this was more than just an ordinary man. So the man, the divine being, asked him a question. "What's your name?" Well, what kind of question is that in the middle of a wrestling match out in the desert? "Oh, by the way, my name is this. What's your name?" It's a calculated, pointed question. What is your name? Jacob answers. What's Jacob's name mean? Deceiver, supplanter, reflected his character. Then the man said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you struggled with God and humans and have overcome." God invites us into a journey, an incredible journey. It's going to be full of struggles, disappointments, difficulties, confusion. But if we will walk with Him, if we will be open to His leading and meditate on His Word, if we'll be open to the wisdom that He's given other people to help us in our journey, as some of the stuff that has been shared and researched this morning, I believe that God will do the same thing if we will cling to him. He will give us a new and different character. And I can say that God has been refining me throughout my life, but even especially in the last 4 years or more, as I have learned more about myself and some of my default situations and reactions, and have learned ways to better manage it. I want to close with this passage. We talked about Abraham and God calling him and so forth. It's interesting that Abraham went through a lot of struggles and difficulties and hardships. But at the end, in chapter 24 of Genesis, it says, "Now Abraham was old, well advanced in age, and the Lord had blessed Abraham in all things." Do you believe that God can bless you in all things? Even though there's struggles, even though there's hardships, even though there's disappointments, if we're willing to grow, if we're willing to learn, if we're willing to wrestle, if we're willing to hold on to God, that's where the change can take place. That's where the good stuff can come out. And after Jacob has his incident with wrestling, prior to that, he sent the family and the possessions ahead of him. But afterwards, he led the family and the possessions to meet his brother. God had been doing a work and did a work with Jacob, and that evening it led up into it, and he was continuing to grow. And I trust that God, the same God, is going to and wants to do that in us when we allow him to. May God help us as we take on that incredible journey and learn and grow in his grace and wisdom in his image.
Hi, my name is Edgar De Leon, and I'm the pastor of the Buffalo Suburban Seventh-day Adventist Church. The message that you just heard was designed to encourage you to walk with Jesus. And each week, we gather to worship him on Sabbath, and we are inviting you to join us next week to journey with us as we await the return of Jesus. We study scripture, we spend time together as a family, and we encourage one another. So please join us either in person or online next week. Blessings.